I'm John Lanius. Welcome to The Room. The Room gives you access to Geniecast top thought leaders, authors, entrepreneurs, business coaches, sports celebrities, and much more. Our guests will share ideas and concepts that you may use to better your organization and propel your teams. Our guest today is Frans Johansson. Frans Johansson is an author, entrepreneur, and acclaimed international speaker. He is the founder and CEO of the MEDICI Group and the author of The MEDICI Effect. He has inspired readers and audiences worldwide with his ideas on leadership, success, innovation, and diversity and inclusion. Hi, Frans. Welcome to The Room.
Thank you.
It is so great, just to let the audience in a little bit. We tried this outside because I know you love to create like a serene background. So thank you so much for being flexible and moving inside. But I think that's important because we're talking about, in many ways, flexibility and kind of the unknown, parts of the world. So why don't we begin with the MEDICI Effect? So tell us about that for those who may not know.
Yeah, sure. And, this little mini experience we had was trying to do this shot outside, bringing it in. It's reflective on everything that is happening in the world today. As you said, I mean, you may have a plan and you may think that you're great at executing at it, but whatever happens, the conditions have changed, and now you have to sort of readjust. The MEDICI Effect is really about how do we think of these ideas to actually change things, to innovate, to come up with new concepts, to reframe what it is that we're doing, or how we are thinking about doing it. So the MEDICI Effect is about the fact that we have the best shot at sort of creating the most breakthrough idea, the most significant ideas at the intersection of different cultures and of different industries, of different disciplines. It's when we bring together this diversity of perspectives, when we bring together this diversity of backgrounds, that we have the best shot at breaking the ground. So I'll just give you a super quick example. You have a hospital in the UK trying to improve how they transfer patients from the surgical unit to the intensive care unit. And sometimes when you do that, there's a lack of collaboration, a lack of coordination. And that means that errors can happen. And some of those errors can be fatal. So that hospital starts asking themselves, how do we fix this problem? Now, the obvious thing to do would be to reach out to other hospitals and ask them, how have you solved this problem? What are best practices? But they didn't. Instead, it sort of looked at a pit stop crew from a Formula One car racing team. In this case, it was McLaren. And they said, how do you think about coordination? How do you think about collaboration? And is this something we can learn from you that we can intersect with what we're doing? And indeed, that's exactly what they did. We were able to drop the error rates. They were able to come up with much better processes. And this is sort of a method that has now spread to hospitals around the world. We have a better shot when we use diversity to drive innovation.
That's great. And I love that you included that example. And so I'd be interested in looking at what happened to you directly over the past year with the pandemic. What were some other hurdles that you encountered or your clients encountered during the pandemic that you'd like to share?
Well, one of the several things. I mean, I think that, and people talk about this a lot now, the pandemic accelerated all of these things that was already happening. The need to innovate, the need to change, the need to come up with new ideas. So that was on the one hand. But on the other, there was something else going on as well in the world, which was that the interest around the concept of diversity and of inclusion skyrocketed. It was catalyzed by the events and what happened with the murder of George Floyd, but it really became a global interest in understanding how can we use diversity and inclusion to sort of achieve better performance, better innovation, and so on. And so when you ask the question what happened during the pandemic, what really happened was that these two ideas merged: the need for constant change and the need to understand how to make use of diversity and inclusion. So that became the problem that we helped our organization solve.
So I love that we're already talking about diversity and inclusion early on in the interview. And something I've said before on this show, if you look at the Amazon, if the Amazon wasn't diverse, it would die. And so I think it's very interesting that in nature, if you don't have diversity, then you have death in many ways. And so I think on some levels we're talking about really interdisciplinary practices. So how do you go beyond diversity and inclusion and really talk about other types of practices that help everyone?
Well, I mean, so let's just be clear. The idea of diversity and inclusion is a foundational idea of innovation. You mentioned nature. Okay, so that's one area where this plays out. But actually, if you think about what drives innovation, it is a combination of factors. The first one is that you are combining two existing ideas into a new one. Okay, that's a core foundational truth of innovation. And what's interesting is that the ideas that you combine, depending on how different those ideas are, depending on how different those concepts are, the higher the likelihood of this new idea being innovative. If they're very closely connected, if they're very similar, the likelihood of this new idea being innovative is actually quite low. And if they're far apart, if they're diverse, that likelihood sort of skyrockets. And so when you think about what does it mean to help organizations to perform, to become faster, to become agile, it is really understanding this dynamic, this foundational dynamic. The Medici effect is really about that. And ultimately, this name harkens back to the Medici family who ruled the city of Florence, some 500 years ago, where they encouraged people from lots of different disciplines, lots of different sculptors, like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, to sort of come together in Florence, in Italy, and recombine their ideas to create new ones. So the question of how does this help? This really addresses virtually any need that an organization has. This need to innovate. It comes from this idea of embracing concepts that are different, concepts that are diverse.
So can you teach innovation, or is it something that's innate in your view?
Oh, you can definitely teach it, and you can learn it. You can experience it. You can practice it. It's been said many times before, but when we are younger, we tend to be more open about the ideas that we can come up with and sort of recombine. We don't really have that many artificial sort of barriers that we place in our mind. As we grow older, we become better and better at categorizing things. Well, listen, if you work in a hospital, the solutions that we should look for are probably going to be in a hospital. Or if you're in a Formula One car racing driver, then if you have a problem, the solutions you're looking for is in this field. But we can actually learn that we should be exploring solutions in areas that are outside of these obvious places to look. And so, although we as a kid may do it naturally, as we get older, we can remember this and actually put it into practice. Now,
love that.
Well, yeah.
Well, so you're talking about the Medici family. You're talking about Florence. So, is the Renaissance important to you? And if so, why?
Well, Renaissance matters because it's the name of our new products. So we can get to talk about that in a bit. But Renaissance means renewal, and that is important to me. I think that when we do not renew in our own lives, when we not renew in the organizations we work for, then we are really setting us up for a significant disadvantage. The fact is that the question I've been getting from CEOs all over the world has changed over the past couple of years. So it used to be that the question I would get some 10 years ago, so 15 years ago, would be, how do I sort of create my next killer product? And then that question changed, became more like, how do I create my next killer business model? That was the question I used to get. Today, I'm not really getting any of those questions. The question I'm getting today is is the world outside of our organization changing faster than we are? Which is a very different question, implying completely different set of answers. It says that if your organization can't renew, if your organization can't find the ability to create mini bursts of renaissance inside of it, then it doesn't matter if it came up with a killer product or a killer business model, because it wouldn't really have a shot or a chance to implement it or adopt it.
We'll be right back with more from Frans Johansson to speak on how diversity drives innovation and the new product, Renaissance. You're watching The Room.
Introducing Genietalk, the latest offering from Geniecast, the #1 virtual event and experience company. With Genietalk, you can connect with an expert on any subject, anywhere, at any time. It's a one-to-one conversation in a private video call on our safe and secure platform. It's not a presentation. It's not a speech. It's an engaging, informative conversation with an expert. Whether it's a C-suite, business author, or prominent speaker, they are on Genietalk. Just search for what you're interested in, from leadership to marketing, to motivation, to diversity and inclusion, and more. Find one of our many experts on that topic. Then set up a time to meet virtually. We'll connect your calendars to find a convenient time. Next, we'll send a link, and then the virtual call happens. Payment is simple and easy through our easy-to-use platform. It's the ultimate fast, frictionless way to speak to an expert about anything, anywhere, anytime. That's Genietalk.
We have a better shot at innovating when we're surrounded by diverse perspectives, or when we ourselves tap into diverse perspectives. Well, innovation and creativity is actually more about being wrong than right, because you're not sure. You're testing new things, you're testing new ideas, and you're not sure which ones are going to work or not. And the reason we start out extremely creative, and this ultimately gets seeped out of us, is because we are aiming to be right. We want to be right on the first try. Picasso made over 50,000 works of art, and in the end, we're talking about maybe 1,000 of those. That's 98% failure rate. 98%. Today, the world is an unpredictable place, and it's only becoming more and more unpredictable. So we have to become accustomed to this. We have to learn what it means to live and to work in a world that is unpredictable. So the traditional way is that you reward success and you punish failure. What I believe we need to move towards is that you reward output and punish inaction.
Such a great little video right there. We're back with Frans Johansson, CEO of the MEDICI Group and author of The MEDICI Effect. Frans, we just saw you on video there, talking about some really important concepts. Would you like to add on to that, and can you connect it to your new product, Renaissance?
Yeah, I mean, one of the key challenges that organizations have when they recognize that they do need to innovate, that they have to create new solutions or new business models or new organizational structures, whatever it is that ultimately it means that they have to change their way of working. They have to change how the behaviors of teams. They have to change how they actually build their culture, and that's an extremely arduous process. Some of these change programs can take years and years and years for an organization. So what I was looking at was, it's not just about the underlying ideas or the message. It is about how do you actually deliver it. And Renaissance is a way for us to basically create change management as a service. Make it frictionless, make it really smooth for an organization to say, look, I want my teams to adopt these set of behaviors. How can this happen quickly? How can this happen inexpensively? And that's basically what we created. It's just very, very exciting, because it's we're in sort of the early phases of this, working with companies all over the world, being able to take teams that they have and quickly enable them to become more innovative, and to do it by enabling them to become more diverse and inclusive. And that's completely unique.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. So from your research, I'm curious, what are the negative effects of a lack of diversity?
Well, So if you don't have diversity, going back to the analogy you made about the Amazon or in nature, if you don't have diversity, what you really are setting yourself up to do is not really being able to adapt when conditions change. And conditions are changing all the time. I wrote a second book called The Click Moment. And in that book, I talk about how much of sort of the future is really not easy to predict. No matter how much data you have, no matter how much insight you have, it's not that straightforward to understand exactly what's going to happen next, particularly for you. You can have new competitors, new technologies, new vendors, new partners. Norms can change in an instant. Customers can change what they want, what they desire. So if you look at your team, you ask yourself, does the constellation of my team, does it have the same sort of constellation as my competitor's team? And basically, you set yourself into a situation where at best, you're going to kind of move in tandem with your competitors, at the absolute best. But if you introduce diversity into this team, you're now able to both adapt to the changing circumstances, but not just adapt, lead it. You were the ones developing the new ideas. You're the ones who's saying, how do I create a better way to transfer patients from the surgical unit to the intensive care unit?
So this may seem like a simple answer, and you've kind of already begun to talk about it, talking about leading. But how should companies actually go about diversifying their workforce that's the most effective?
Great question. And I would say that the number one thing, there's two things that they can do. The first one is look at the workforce they have right now and ask themselves, how inclusive are they of this? What we find is that oftentimes organizations are, whether they're diverse or not, and we'll get to that in a second, but whether they're diverse or not, they're not as inclusive as they could be. So by ensuring that you are actually able to make use of the diversity that you have, you are already sort of getting ahead of the game. This is one piece. The second one has to do with how do you actually bring in more diversity? Now, this has to do with both how you think about your hiring, and we talk a lot about this idea that hiring tends to be very tailored towards, well, what does expertise look like? What does experience look like for this position? And then we want that. But the fact is that the shelf life of expertise is shrinking, right? Because the world is changing so quickly. So what you're really looking for are not just other skill sets, but what you should be looking for is how does this person add diversity to the team that I already have? And here we think about diversity in four ways. We define it as who you are. That has to do with your race, your gender, your age, your sexual orientation, and so on. It has to do with what you do. That has to do with your industry, your education, your function. It has to do with how you do it. Are you extroverted? Are you introverted? There's other types of neurodiversity. And then with whom you do it. That's to do with the networks that you built through your career, in your life, in your community, in the company you're at, in the industry you're in, and so on. These four dimensions of diversity means that as you're thinking about how do I diversify my team, look at how can you add to that across these four dimensions. And then ask yourself, can I bring in new people on the one hand? And can I make use of the people that I already have in different constellations on the other?
That's great. So over the past year, we've seen an increase in movements such as Black Lives Matter that bring attention to issues of race, social injustice, and discrimination. In what ways, further than what you've already said, can businesses show support to help foster change without seeming as though they're just jumping on a trend?
Yeah, well, number one is to not just jump on a trend. What if the actions you take are entirely driven, so here, how do you know that you're jumping on a trend? Are the actions you take entirely driven by PR, by messaging, by satisfying the demand of a board member, you're probably jumping on a trend. But if you are actually looking at it in a longer term, then you may avoid that. And we basically think of companies as being on a diversity leadership index, we call it a DLI, from 1 to 5. And I'll just go through it very quickly because it can help whoever's listening and watching this to try to reflect on where are they at on this. And the question that one has to answer is, why do you believe that diversity and inclusion matters? And number one is that you don't believe that it matters, so it's irrelevant. Number two means that you believe it matters for compliance reasons. The law dictates that we can't discriminate and so on, so that's why we have to do it. Number three is that it's the right thing to do. Many people are surprised by this because there's actually 5 levels, as I said. They believe that maybe that should be number one. Maybe as a society, that should be number one. I believe that. But corporations tend to be driven by completely different motivations. They're not acquiring, they're not going through with a merger because it's the right thing to do. They're doing it for completely different reasons, usually strategic reasons or something else. So that's number three. And most organizations today, I believe, are around number three. Number four means that actually what is driving this has to do with market. It is market driven. Your customers are getting more diverse, your employees are getting more diverse, hence you have to get more diverse. And this recognition of that, and that is what's driving this need. But the fifth level means that you recognize that there's a strategic and competitive advantage for having diverse and inclusive teams. And because you care about strategic and competitive advantage, that's where you're going. And what we found is that organizations that grasp this piece, this level 5, for them, they have long ago left the idea of this being a trend or flash in the pan. They're trying to understand, how do we make use of this? How do we think about this so that we can increase our innovation rate, we can increase our rate of differentiation, we can increase our margins, our market share. Those are the type of questions, those are the type of the problems they're trying to solve through the use of diversity and inclusion. And that's a completely different problem. You're way out of a short-term blip at that point.
So great. More with Frans Johansson and our 5 questions after this break. You're watching The Room. Welcome back. We're talking with author, entrepreneur, and acclaimed international speaker, Frans Johansson. Every week on The Room, we ask our guests the same 5 questions. Now, Frans, as someone who looks to gain and share knowledge from multiple disciplines, we hope you'll appreciate how we're collecting insights on specific topics from our guests to provide a range of expertise for our audience. Are you ready for your 5 questions?
Let's go.
All right, question number 1. What do you see as the biggest opportunities that businesses aren't taking advantage of in the world today?
I don't believe that businesses have understood what it really means to embrace the world of hybrid or world of virtual. What I'm seeing is that they're grappling and trying to figure out what it means for them. We're doing the same thing, but there's tremendous amount of room and opportunity now to shape a new world of working, a new way to relate to each other in the workplace. So I think that's where companies to figure that out, and they can actually figure out what it means to lead on that. I think they're going to have a huge advantage in how they think about recruit and able to retain talent.
So great. Number 2, if you could have a conversation with one person from any time or anywhere, who would it be and why?
It would probably be with either one of my grandparents on my mother's side. I never got to know them, and so my background is I'm mixed. My mother was Black and Cherokee. My dad Swedish, and I really got to know my Swedish side of and I grew up in Sweden. But it would have been wonderful if I could have a conversation with my grandfather, grandma.
Love that. Number 3, what is one book every person in business should read and why?
So let me maybe suggest something unexpected. Maybe The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. It really talks about genetics and how genes are operating effectively entirely selfishly because of competition with other genes. But as a course of that, they very obviously end up collaborating with lots of other genes. That's why we have the human body. That's why we have horses and dogs and trees. And that means that the optimal pathway for us forward always comes from this type of collaboration. We just have to understand, even when our absolute best move is to be thinking about what is best for us, it is going to end up meaning that we are collaborating with others. And so the MEDICI effect is all about what does it mean to collaborate? What does it mean to partner with? What does it mean to get ideas and borrow them from each other and build on them? And that is what actually creates the world we live in. That's what's going to create the future. But we can do so through this intersection of operating for what we want to go for, while still looking at who are we collaborating, who are we partnering with, who are we working with to actually make that happen.
That's great. Number 4, what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Oh, it's this simple piece of advice from my dad. And it's been said many times. I don't think people believe it, though. And it is, do what you love and the rest will take care of itself. And at any point in time in my career when I've been thinking about the choices I could make, whether under tremendous pressure, financial pressure or not, this has still been the guiding light. And so do what you love and the rest will take care of itself has turned out to certainly be true in my regard. But I do think it's probably one of the toughest pieces of advice I actually stick to.
And then number 5, why is a conversation better than a lecture?
Well, it's sometimes it's better than a lecture. I don't think that MLK's "I Have a Dream" speech would have turned out better as a conversation. But I think one has to understand what one is trying to accomplish. Here's what I will say. It is impossible to learn something from somebody else when you're giving a lecture. I know, I've been giving tons of them. A conversation allows you to learn. And I believe learning and the need to learn, the desire to learn, the hunger for us to learn is paramount. And that can only really happen when you're engaging with somebody else. So I think that's probably one of the biggest pieces that a lecture can just never, ever give you if you are the lecturer.
It's been so great to have Frans Johansson as my guest today on The Room and for sharing his thoughts and insights. Frans, what would you like to leave us with today?
Well, I think we covered a lot of areas. I was just going to say that for the people that are listening to this and watching this, the key idea that diversity drives innovation is linking two major trends in the world today. And wherever you look, you're going to see these trends playing out. There's the trend around innovation. There's the trend around diversity. You have to try to figure out where you are at in that piece. And for us, that has meant, every day we think about this particular intersection of diversity and innovation. And so that has been the guiding light for us. I think it's going to be the guiding light for almost every other leader and every other team, wherever you work today.
So great. Frans, thank you again for joining me on The Room today.
Thank you. This is wonderful. I really appreciate it.
Join us next week when our guest will be Zarna Garg, an award-winning screenwriter and stand-up comedian who proudly represents brown women everywhere. Zarna is a rare voice tackling the type of humor few, if any, Indian immigrant women have ever attempted. I'm John Lanius. We'll see you next time on The Room.